My next guest, Christi Hoehn, is a mother, grandmother, public speaker, entrepreneur, and the founder of the Talk of the Table lifestyle brand. Christi is a bilateral, below-the-knee amputee and embodies the idea that no matter the struggle, you can live with style, grace, and joy. It is my pleasure to introduce Christi Hoehn. Welcome, everyone. My name is Rick Bontkowski, and this is the AMP'D UP211 Podcast. Hey, Christi, how are you? Good to see you.
Good morning, Rick. At least it's morning on the West Coast.
Right, exactly. That's where you are, right?
Yeah, sunny California.
What part of California?
We're right outside LA.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah,
Right above Malibu.
That's a vast territory.
Yeah.
I've only been there a couple times in my life, and I was overwhelmed by how big of a place California is, but certainly beautiful. And you look very bright-eyed today, as usual.
Thank you.
So very good to see you. And I appreciate you taking the time. I know you have many plates that you are spinning as an amputee and as an entrepreneur and all the other things that you engage, which is certainly impressive given your life story and the many struggles that you have endured as a amputee, a bilateral amputee. No less. When I first started researching you, obviously the Ellen show piece comes up, and I think that's certainly a beautiful piece of news and film, and let's call it a mini documentary.
Yeah.
And what I really found with you is there's just so much more to your story, and such a long history of truly struggle and things that you've been through and things that you fought through that led you eventually to amputation. So
Right.
very often, when people meet an amputee, they think, okay, well, there was some cataclysmic event that occurred or some specific medical circumstance that occurred and, you lost a limb. And very often, like yourself, there's so much more to the story. There's so much more. And someone who began a medical journey like yourself at 15 with chronic pain it's pretty remarkable stuff as far as all of the events that led up to your first amputation. Getting diagnosed, was a big thing. I mean, it was a really, really difficult landscape for you to navigate, especially at a very young age. And I want you to share with the audience, as far as kicking off this interview, with what those early years were like and how you eventually, ended up with the diagnosis that you did. And I think it's best that you explain that and give us some narrative as to what that experience was like for you. So I'll let you do that.
Well, thank you. I think that, adolescence is hard enough without everybody telling you that the pain and fatigue and, various symptoms that you're experiencing are all in your head. And so, going through from the age of 15, and not knowing what was wrong with me and simply thinking that this is what everyone feels like, I just can't handle it. And that was the message that I was given over and over and over again. In fact,
Were you a timid child? Were you shy? Were you Were you someone that a doctor could look at and say, I mean, not to be patronizing, but, sweetie, I think it's just in your head.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, were you the kind of kid that sort of said, well, okay, maybe it is in my head?
Yes and no, but I'll tell you what happens is anytime we tell ourselves or someone tells you enough times, there's going to be a point where you subscribe to it, that you believe it and it becomes ingrained in you. And even though I was I was a shy kid, but I was like a closeted actor, or I wanted so much to be on stage and do those things, but I was terribly, terribly shy in that respect. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a combination, and especially in the medical community, we have a tendency to hold them on a pedestal and accept what they say as the gospel. And when we are vulnerable, because when you're sick, you are incredibly vulnerable. And, that power of suggestion or whatever, it sent me on a spiral. At 15, I was, just feeling so bad most of the time. And then, you start trying to compensate by maybe bad behaviors. I lived in an alcoholic family. So we had a variety
Mm-hmm.
of chaos, that was going on in the house. And so as a young girl, then, we started experimenting with alcohol and other kinds of just, missing curfew and, doing those kind of things where I
Sure.
became, instead of the straight A, um, you know, good girl, I was labeled then as lazy, as complaining, a hypochondriac. And then they could add to the list of, you know, she's drinking, she's staying out late, she's doing these kind of behaviors. And I see now, looking back, of how I was simply acting out, and trying to get some kind of foothold at that time in my life. That seemed to escape me otherwise. And so, living through high school, sick and not understanding why you felt so bad. There was a point when I was 17, I didn't want to live anymore. The pain and the chaos of living in my home, and all those things just came crashing down on me. And one night I took a random bottle of pills from the medicine cabinet, and I woke that next morning not wanting to, but I did wake. And
Mm-hmm.
there was more purpose for me still. And so I ended up, and nobody knew about that, and wouldn't know if I hadn't, mentioned it. And so I never told my parents, but with all
Yeah.
my acting out and all these things that were going on, I ended up spending the end of my junior year of high school in the psych ward. Um, but I was lured into going to the hospital by my mom saying that they wanted to do tests on me to figure out what was wrong. I was so excited to have that done, not knowing that she actually meant for me to go into the psychiatric ward.
Yeah, I know this part of your story, and
Yeah,
getting the sort of the carpet pulled out from under you, and someone sort of deceiving you that you trust
right.
into being put in that situation, which probably felt very much like a betrayal.
Oh, incredibly.
Um,
Mhm.
wanting to find the answers, and I'm assuming your symptoms were persistent, however generalized enough that you could kind of attach it to a lot of different things. And
Right,
what I have personally found in the medical community, that when they can't, fit you into that specific box at that specific time,
right,
that's when, I mean, let's face it, people practice medicine. Okay. They're not experts. They
right.
practice it. And very often, you are the subject of that practice.
Yeah.
And they're trying to figure out, what's going on here. And if it doesn't read right, textbook definition kind of read right,
Mhm.
very often they just say, well, I mean, for lack of a better word, maybe she's just nuts. Maybe she's
It
crazy.
was. Let's send in the
And
psychiatrist. Maybe we can get some answers. And, that seemed to be the go-to. And, knowing what I know now, at that point in time, 70% of scleroderma patients were undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. And that's
yeah,
an incredible number. Now they've isolated proteins and done things like that, thanks to AIDS research and autoimmune disease research. But at that time, it was such a low rate of diagnosis and a high misdiagnosis that the suicide rate and things, substance abuse and things like that in that general community was really, really high.
but being diagnosed with scleroderma, for your personal journey was, boy, oh boy, it took a long time. I mean,
Did
it took a long time
yeah.
for you to finally be able to go, oh man, I have something. Like
Right.
this is what's been plaguing me,
It was a
affecting every
relief.
aspect.
You
Yeah,
know? You even though you have a dire diagnosis, it was a relief. At least I wasn't crazy, and so initially, they had told me I had osteoarthritis and a
yeah.
disease called scleroderma, and I didn't know what scleroderma was, and that word meant nothing to me. I was so
I'm sure
focused on
arthritis. Yeah, I was going to say
arthritis,
arthritis probably meant something to you. Yeah, because
Yeah.
we've all heard that as children. Yeah, your grandma
Yeah.
has arthritis.
Grandma, yes, exactly, and I was a vibrant 20-year-old, sitting in front of this doctor and getting that kind of diagnosis, and I had tears started running down my face, and he said to me, let's just say his bedside manner was non-existent, and so he
Oh boy.
he looks at me and he said, "You're just gonna have to learn to deal with this." And so I was alone,
Ouch.
in this office with him and through my tears drove home and not understanding, even what he said. And thankfully things were written down for me because I didn't even have a grasp of it. And then began my journey figuring out, okay, what's next?
But when you consider the fact that you had to be essentially coerced into going to a hospital under the false pretense that we're going to figure this out, we're going to run some tests.
Yeah.
And then I've heard you describe this moment where you are, I believe you describe it as in an elevator and you're going up to a particular floor
Yeah.
and you're like, wait a minute, where are we going? Like,
Yeah.
what's happening right now? And
Yeah.
then to be told, well, you're going to the psych ward, we're going
Right.
to have you evaluated. I mean, at a young age, I can't even imagine what goes through a young woman's
That
mind.
was excuse me.
You're fine.
So that was, that door opening and realizing where we were in the hospital. We just kept going up floor after floor after floor. And I was kind of questioning, well, where are we going? I knew where the floors were for, other patient rooms. And I knew that the top floor of the hospital was a psychiatric ward. And so we get up to the top, the doors open. To the left is the lockup, and to the right is the open psychiatric wing. And they're, kind of like, "Oh, here we are." And I went, "Whoa, whoa, wait, what are you doing? This isn't
Hmm.
what we talked about." And so I had a choice. My choice was, well, you are free to leave, but if you try to leave, we're putting you in the lockup. And so that
Wow.
was my choice. And, of course, I felt incredibly betrayed by my mother. And when I was taken to my room, I just sat there and cried and cried and cried and cried and begged for them to take me home. I had been so excited to be admitted to the hospital to do testing because I wanted to find out what was wrong with me. Um, and then it just completely evaporated into this deception. And I was there for 4 weeks, and it was very enlightening. And so it wasn't a bad experience when once I finally calmed down and everything. They did do medical tests on me, and they did find out I had Raynaud's syndrome, which is a constriction of your blood vessels. But
Oh yeah.
otherwise, they just basically treated me for being a part of an alcoholic family. Which I don't
Yeah.
think was what my parents were after. They were trying to find out what my problem was,
Yeah.
not theirs.
Oh, yeah. Your parents are like, well, we don't need to talk about that, do we?
Right? It was the irony was not lost.
Exactly. They're like, oh no, this is becoming an exercise in them
Whoa, whoa, whoa,
figuring out
wait,
like,
wait. Yeah, no, no,
yeah,
no,
how
it's
messed
about
up our
her.
family is.
It was
You're
it was
like,
a little bit of a rude
you're like,
awakening.
you're like, mom and dad, I have to tell them everything.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I get to talk about you guys? Yay. So it did end up,
Oh my gosh.
becoming something better, than I had
That's funny.
initially managed to, have in my mind of what this whole scenario was going to look like, because I wasn't crazy, and I was dealing with some sort of something, even though we didn't diagnose it coming out. At least I had
Hmm.
one answer. I have Raynaud's and I have a crazy family.
Right. Exactly. No, exactly. And when you were going through that, as a teen and having all those symptoms,
Mhm.
would that be something that you could find any relief from? I mean, was it something that you did develop strategies to tolerate? Were there certain activities that you would say, okay,
Yeah,
this tends to create a spike,
right.
or if I do this other thing, I'm having a better day today. I mean, were you, even as a young adult, like modifying your behaviors
Yeah.
so
I
that you
had
could,
to. I had to,
yeah.
yeah. I had, I was an avid water skier. Of course, that's seasonal, but we had a lake house, and I had to
Hmm.
give up water skiing. I couldn't hold on to the rope. And
Yeah.
then I started getting at, let's see, the age of 20, I developed ulcerations on my ankle. And so then I couldn't even put on a ski. And so during the time between 15 and probably 20, until I developed the ulcerations, I was just grinning and bearing it. When I'd water ski and you just peel your hands off the rope because holding on to it so tightly would hurt, the arthritis. And
Sure.
just kind of doing things like that. Now, I slept a lot. Okay, what teen doesn't sleep a lot, I think. And that's why my parents, I think, believed, I was just a lazy teenager. And it wasn't that. It was literally just my body saying, you need rest, you need to be down. And
Yeah.
you probably have heard of the spoon theory, and I don't know why they use spoons, but basically what it is every day people with chronic illness, you're given so many spoons, and how many spoons you use up is how much energy you have during the day. And sometimes maybe even your spoons are supposed to last you all week. And if you use them up in one day, then you don't have any for the rest of the week. And that's how I had to
Yeah.
start adapting, knowing how much effort I could needed to put into something, and then I'd have to let some other stuff go.
But so much of chronic pain,
Mm,
because I know, plenty of people that struggle with
yeah.
some form of chronic pain.
Mhm.
This becomes somewhat mystifying for the medical community at times.
Right.
And it's very easy to disregard someone
Mhm.
who is managing chronic pain because it doesn't necessarily have a specific label or a
Right.
specific face.
Right.
And I know people who do suffer in silence with chronic pain,
Right.
and they have to build their entire lives around that issue and
Absolutely.
miss out on so much
Mm.
and, never truly engage certain things, certain activities, certain relationships, certain people
Right.
because I can't do it. I just
Well,
cannot do it.
pain, chronic pain, and pain in general, but chronic pain in particular, is something that dictates everything. It dictates when you smile, when you sleep, when you laugh, when you cry, when you eat, all of
Yeah.
those things. And dealing with chronic pain to the point where I can tell you without question that from the age of 15 until probably 5 years ago, there was not one day of my life that I didn't have pain. And it would vary from, okay, you can take a Tylenol to I can't handle it. And the narcotics aren't even helping, everything in between. And so it's kind of crazy when you look back and you go, wow, here I am 58. My pain is managed a lot better now because I do yoga and meditation and things
Hmm.
like that. And so realizing how many years, had been lost, because of pain. You're talking about 40 years of your life, living in chronic pain. It's pretty incredible. And I'm definitely not the only one. And so that was a catalyst in me choosing to have my first amputation was after
Yeah,
12 years.
I wanted to lead up to that.
Mhm.
Because someone who looks at you at face value and says, okay, double amputee, um, you lost which was the first leg to go below the
My
knee?
left, my
Your
left.
left.
Mhm.
And those circumstances stemmed around an infection. What was exactly the reason why you ended up losing your left leg below the knee?
Right. So at 20, I developed the first ulceration on my ankle, and we were treating it for over a year as a brown spider bite, thinking that I got it at the lake house.
Yeah.
Excuse me. um, so we thought that the spider bite was from the lake house, and so they were treating me as they do all spider bites for over a year. And I had changed doctors, and she was an internal medicine doctor, and she pointed down to my ankle and she said, "What is that?" And I said, "Oh, I've got a spider bite." She said, "Let me take a look at it." And she looked at it and said, "That's not a spider bite. That is an ulceration caused by the scleroderma." And that was the first I realized, that that was happening. And this was back circa, gosh, how old am I? I'm trying to think of what year this would have been, like 1986, something like that. I believe 80, maybe 84, 84.
Scleroderma is it's a complex
It
disease.
is very complex.
Can you before we circle back to the
Mhm.
first amputation, I think it's important for the audience to get a little train up on what
What
scleroderma is
scleroderma is.
because super serious stuff. And
Yeah.
I think they would benefit from your take because it's something that has been a persistent part of your life.
Right, right. And being able to advocate for scleroderma patients is really important to me because
Absolutely.
it can be a death sentence for many people, and it was for me. And so I had or have the systemic disease, and that means it not only affects my skin but my internal organs. scleroderma is an overproduction of collagen within your system. And basically, it starts attacking your organs and your skin and causing all sorts of little havoc. And for me, it had already at diagnosis at 20 had affected my heart, my lungs, esophagus, minimally affecting my kidneys. And I was already showing signs in my face. This part of my face had changed so much, and my smile became even toothier, and that kind of thing. And then my hands, of course, the arthritis is something that, or osteoarthritis, goes hand in hand with scleroderma, as does lung disease. And so I developed pulmonary fibrosis and something called bronchiectasis, which is a fun little side disease that
Wow.
causes little pockets of fluid in your lungs. And then my esophagus was very heavily affected, and I had a hiatal hernia, um, chronic acid reflux to the point of a bleeding esophagus, and I had to have my esophagus dilated twice just so that I could swallow any kind of food. And so there were, thing after thing. I developed some problems with my heart, with a prolapse, and just arrhythmia, and blah 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 blah. So it seemed like at every stage there was like a new little fun thing to deal
Yeah,
with. And
seemed like it was touching just about everything that it could.
yeah, and at that time, when I was 20, they really didn't believe I would live past 26. And as far as it had progressed already and everything, it didn't look likely. Um, I had a I had my son when I was 22, and a year later, he actually saved my life during the night. I had been on my feet the entire day, which I knew better, but it was Mother's Day, and it was an art fair, and just something really fun to do. And I pushed myself past my limit and ended
Yeah,
up,
I'm
yeah,
guessing you walked around all day.
all day, all day. And it was hot
Yep.
out, and the whole thing, but I was happy, and I did it. Well, during the night, he woke up for his pacifier, and I got up, went over to his bed to give him his pacifier, and got back into bed, as I'd done a million other times. And I get in bed and I think, wow, everything feels a little bit wet. And then I pull back
You're
the
about to tell me
covers.
you're about to
Yeah.
tell me you were bleeding. Yeah.
I lifted back the covers, and in the moonlight, my white sheets were black. And I couldn't figure out what was happening. I flipped on the light, and I was in a bloodbath. It had burst
Wow.
through a vessel in my foot. And everywhere I walked to my son's crib, I was spraying blood everywhere. And if he had not woken, I would never have woken. And it's,
Yeah, you would have bled
just,
out.
yeah, I would have bled out. No pain, nothing. And, thankfully, we were living with my parents at the time, and I was able to get them up and get me to the emergency room where they could get a pressure bandage on it and get it stopped. But the pain of having that kind of pressure on it, because these types of ulcerations are all nerve, and no matter how much narcotics they gave me, it wasn't touching the pain. And so I cried, and cried and cried for probably, well, we got home from the hospital around 3 a.m., and around 7:30 in the morning, my mom called the hospital because she's crying by this point, because I am sobbing in pain and I can't stop. And anyway, they ended up changing, or telling, I'm sorry, they ended up telling me I could go ahead and remove my bandages, and then I would, hopefully have stopped bleeding. So I did. And luckily, save one other time, that never happened again. And so we ended up just being super careful. My mom would always say to me, "You need to get off your foot. You need to get off your foot." And
Yeah.
the thing is, what kind of life can you have, with your foot elevated all the time? And that was the only way for me to be able to have any kind of relief and to keep my foot from opening again. Because once it would
Right.
heal, if I was on my feet at all, it would end up opening up again. I tried pressure socks. I tried, different ointments and therapies and all the things that we could do, but it just wasn't going to help if I wanted to have a normal life. And so that's when I started after I'd had 3 um, I had 3 skin grafts and I had multiple debridements. I had bone infections and hyperbaric treatments and blah, 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 12 years of fighting it. And I said,
Yeah.
no more. That's it. I'm done. Unless you can offer me something permanent, then I am more interested in having the foot amputated. And so that's what
But don't
led
you
me.
think so much of when you're put in that position where it's almost voluntary, don't you think that's when you do that sort of life inventory and say, this is really just about quality of life at this
Quality
point?
of life. It was all about
Like,
quality of life. And what,
yeah,
societal, you know, things, influences didn't really even matter to me at all. I had so many doctors saying, "Oh, you're too young." I was 32 years old. I'd spent 12 years fighting this. "You're too young. You're too
yeah,
young." I go, "What? Am I too young to have my life back? I don't think so." Doing my passions of cooking and designing and doing these things were so far out of my reach for so many years that I just wanted it back again. I wanted me back.
yeah. Yeah, and making the decision to do that first amputation,
Mhm.
um, what was your what was that like? I mean, what was that initial reaction to that new
Yeah.
uh, sort of lifestyle, that new, becoming an amputee? I don't think it's ever truly what any of us expect
Right.
because it's not it's not something. And so much of my work with this podcast is about the normalization
Mhm.
of this kind of community, this kind of lifestyle, removing those stigmas
Right.
about limb loss or limb difference,
Yeah.
and really showcasing stories of people like yourself that managed to traverse the, you know, I guess you'd call it the tragedy of
Right.
what amputation is,
Mhm.
and to go on to live their best life
Right.
in career, in love, and all of the things that bring us joy and happiness. And
Right.
because you're someone that does it with such grace, um, I think your story is so important in that regard. So you have that first amp, and
Mhm.
then where does that kind of leave you? I mean, where does
Well,
that leave your outlook on life?
so going up to it was kind of terrifying because what happened was I had a nurse who was coming in and helping me change bandages and everything, and we were coming up to the date. Now, anytime my foot healed, it would heal very rapidly. You're 100% off your feet. You're, doing all this cares and everything, bandage changes and whatnot. And so once it starts healing, it goes really fast. And the week, 2 weeks before the scheduled surgery, it really started healing fast. And the only ones that knew were my nurse and my doctor and myself. And
Probably
because
thought you were making a mistake.
well, I needed to make sure this is the right time. And you're kind of
Yeah.
going, "Okay, universe, is this the right thing? What am I supposed to be doing? Is this a sign that maybe right now isn't okay?" And
Hmm.
I had a very good friend who had been killed in a sailplane accident a few years prior, and he was, an orthopedic surgeon, and their family, were like family to me. And the nurse who was helping me, she had actually worked for him in the surgery room, and she had said to me, "Well, what would he have said? What would he tell you?" And all the years that that I knew him, we had never discussed what the future held for my foot. Did could I expect it to be amputated or anything like that? We had never discussed it. And I was sad about that, of course, facing this, that we had never talked about it. So Mary had said, boy, we wish, Chuck had talked to you about this. Well, I was having dinner with his wife a few days before the surgery. And I went over there and I hadn't mentioned to her how fast it was healing or anything. I needed that to be my choice and nobody else's. And I didn't want to worry anyone. And so we sat down to dinner and she said, "Oh, I just hate this for you," she said. "But you know what? Chuck said someday this would happen." And
Mm,
it was like, okay, there we go. I got my sign. This is the right thing. And this is, he did mention it. He just didn't mention it to me. And so I
right.
got back to the house and called Mary, my nurse, and said, "Mary, I got my answer." And so I was able to move forward from there with absolute certainty that it was the right thing to do. Unfortunately, in the hospital, I acquired MRSA, and it made it so it wasn't quite as straightforward as we had really planned on. And I ended up with two subsequent surgeries, emergency surgeries, and a lot of pain and a lot of terrible antibiotics and, 12 weeks of misery. And of course, rethinking my entire life in the process, what have I done? But I
Well,
knew
yeah,
ultimately.
because you're so much of all these decisions that you're making
Mhm.
in the interest of quality of life, forging ahead, putting on that brave face and wanting to heal and wanting
Right.
to get your life back and to be continually dealt another bad hand
I
is
never saw it that way, though. I think,
describe how you, yeah, describe it.
yeah.
Like, how did you see that in terms of those setbacks?
Well, so I'm not a fatalist, and so I have a very wonderful tendency to be looking for the brighter side, and I knew I was gonna make it through this. I knew that there was, going to be a better day on the other side, and I needed just to put myself in my mindset into getting well again and then making the best of it, once I was well. And so that's how I forged through. It was heartbreaking, at times, but it was something that I just knew it was going to be okay. I just needed to get through it. And so I did. And, the 12, 14 weeks on vancomycin and two surgeries more. And I finally then was out of the hospital again. And back to learning to walk on a prosthetic. And so, as a single mother, my son was then 9.
Yeah.
My focus was on being the best that I could for him and making him proud. That so I kept volunteering at school. I kept doing all the things, with our church and with our friends and keeping busy and doing all those things and just pushing myself forward to learn to walk again and eventually then without crutches or a walker. And I just didn't look back.
Yeah. And that kind of resiliency, I think, is where the fascination comes from, especially people that, write to me, about the podcast and about the stories. And, you know, that is something that I think we have to recognize is pretty extraordinary about human beings and people that don't go to that defeated kind of space. they just continue to forge ahead, forge ahead, forge ahead. And, in my own personal experience, there had always been setback, healing, forward progress,
Right.
setback, healing, forward progress. And
Absolutely.
very, very much of my life over like a 4 or 5 year period had become sort of that cycle
Mhm.
of something would happen, there'd be some kind of major surgery, then there was rehabilitation, and then there was smooth sailing only until I got to the next challenge. And
Okay.
then it just would repeat.
Right.
And I think we all have different sources of strength and
Mhm.
inspiration. I'm going to assume that, your son was probably a big part of that
Oh,
in,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, giving you that reason to
Mhm.
keep going.
Yeah.
I think hopefully we all on some level feel responsible to something that is inspiring us to stay in the game and keep going. And,
Right.
having another child and then losing your other leg,
Right.
tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah. Well, I had actually 2 more children, and they were 19
Two more
months apart.
children.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it was after the birth of my daughter, who was my last child, that my other leg just started on the same path and, ulcerations. And I went, no, 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 no. I am not going to lose 12 years again, facing the same exact thing, the same scenario of pain, and knowing that, again, there was nothing that we could permanently do. There are a lot of temporary fixes for these types of ulcerations, but ultimately, just staying off your feet and all the time is the only way to keep them from happening. So
Right.
that is no quality of life, of course. And that was when I just went into it. We were living in Germany at the time. So, I was faced with a completely different set of circumstances with regard to the hospital, but I had experience because I had birthed 2 children there. And so I knew that, the system was really good. And then there was a hospital there that was just for amputation medicine. And so that was reassuring to know that, you know, everything was specialized. And so all the doctors and all the prosthetists and therapists and everybody worked together as a team. So it made it for me a lot more fluid, and you have a completely different level of understanding in that kind of situation,
Mm-hmm.
and the rehabilitation and everything was so much more comprehensive. So I got, I believe, the best care that I possibly could have gotten anywhere in the world. And to the point of even the therapy, including tai chi and equestrian therapy and archery and cooking
Wow.
and art, and just on and on. So it made it kind of a mind body spirit. And I think, throughout all of this, I think that's something we are lacking here, is in when people are going through this kind of trauma, we have to not only look at the physicality part and making sure, the infection and da 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 da, but how are you feeling, and getting you through psychologically, and showing yourself that you are still you. You still have these, passions to do, and you have your family and your friends and all this that make your life rich. And so I think we have a tendency to encapsulate that kind of, well, she's now disabled, so she's not able to do A, B, and C, and we impose some of that on ourselves, but society definitely imposes a lot of that on us.
Do you feel like some of that, what you're speaking of, these kind of generalizations
Mhm.
about people who either are amputee or let's just say they're in a wheelchair,
Mhm.
which you've spent, time in a wheelchair. Do you feel like so much of your entrepreneurial spirit, okay, building,
Mm,
what I consider to be very much a lifestyle brand,
mhm.
um, comes from that place of, mind, body, spirit, you know, um, sort of encapsulating when I look at someone like yourself and I look at, your Talk of the Table series and everything you're doing in that space, it's very much a lifestyle. I mean, it's
It
really
is.
not a specific discipline.
Mhm,
It is to a degree. I mean, there's very much toolbox items that you're presenting.
mhm.
However, it's very much a way to live your life. And can you expand on that when you talk about, when you see yourself in that entrepreneurial space? Like what is that all about? What would you want someone to know about you in that regard?
So I think for me, the drive has always been there. And I come from an entrepreneurial family. So, kind of a natural tendency toward that and my creativity and all that. So it was kind of fun to discover this kind of lifestyle, as you say, as I got older and more experienced. Cooking has always been an integral part of our family, back to my grandparents, and they were hobby cooks, and we we just kind of grew up eating gourmet foods and enjoying that kind of preparation and creativity and all that. So it seemed like a natural kind of progression. But when we lived in Germany, then I discovered this raclette, that they were doing, and it's eating, food that you cook at the table. So I wanted to take that mixed with, I had children, smaller children at the time. I wanted to have a fun time at dinner, and I also wanted them to learn to cook. So it's part of my kind of entertaining, my teacher, my mothering, kind of all those hats that you wear, and they all came together. So I kind of laugh sometimes. I call myself the footless Martha. And so, creativity and entertaining and all that is something that's always been just who I am. My next door neighbor, before I lost my leg or anything, had used to call me Martha all the time. So it was kind of just
Well,
natural.
not to not to seem like I'm getting in line, but I thought the same thing when I first discovered you, and I'm sure it was through either a blog or a social media post, and I thought, I'm like, here's a really kind of bright-eyed, full of energy amputee. What's she all about? And then I did a deeper dive and found that you were really doing some extraordinary things in this space. And you bring such an interesting, perspective to the community in that promotion of family. I've watched, many of the pieces you've done with your daughter,
Yeah.
and they're wonderful. I mean, and it's not just necessarily the educational piece is very beneficial, but there's very much a vibration, that
Yeah.
comes from what you do,
Yeah.
and it's very uplifting,
I
and it's almost in a sense, if I could describe it, it's like, oh yeah, and by the way, she's an amputee, you know.
Right, and that's what, I think that's where we all need to take a little moment to shift our focus. That's something I talk about extensively, and is that, you don't just come out of the hospital and you are now another species.
Right.
You are first still a human being, and a mother, and a wife,
There
and
isn't a zoo. There isn't a zoo for us. Is that what you're saying?
well,
Where we all
it's kind
go
of
and
funny how, all of a sudden we box ourselves, and of course people love labels, right? And so
yeah, right.
that was, so my interestingly is, my boyfriend, he's in TV production and digital media and everything. And so we have decided we're taking this to a whole new level here pretty quick. We're working on right now converting one of our rooms. So we have quite a large room here in the house that's going to be our television studio. And so we're
Awesome.
going to go ahead and start filming. It'll be a lifestyle kind of show, and fun and witty, and I just happen to be an amputee. Um, there's so many labels. You could say I'm a scleroderma survivor. I'm a lung cancer survivor. There's all these things that I am, but I'm first and foremost me. And that's the part that I think we can have some fun with, just getting out there and letting people know it's not that doesn't dictate my life, and it doesn't limit me, and it doesn't limit any of us in what we can be
Right.
and who we can be. It's right in between our ears, and definitely not our limbs.
Absolutely. And the piece you did, for Ellen,
Mhm.
really, really wonderful stuff, and certainly addressing, the amputee journey.
Yeah,
But I think also really tapped into what you're describing as you.
yeah,
You as a human, you as a person,
yeah.
you as a what I consider to be a just extraordinary energy, and
Thanks.
something something that I want to be able to tap into and say, I kind of want to be part of this club. And when I say the club, I mean the people that do it well, that do it with grace,
Honestly, I'll
you
tell you
know?
what club it is. It's the Happy Club. And when I started on
Right.
it's the Happy Club, and I started on a very purposeful journey several years back, and getting out of a bad marriage and back into finding out, who are you, and my soul, my spirit, and letting it soar, and getting rid of this kind of anxiety and things that I imposed on myself because I didn't think I was enough. And once I bridged that, and once I got into meditation, got into all this woo woo stuff, right, my
Yeah.
happiness quotient just soared. And in the process, I realized I had a unique opportunity, and that is to be able to be an ambassador for people who survive scleroderma, who survive lung cancer, who happens to be an amputee. All of these little hats, if you will, um,
Hmm.
give me an opportunity, a very unique opportunity. But then I realized how big of an opportunity we all have, in our lives, regardless if we have a disability, to get out and smile, and be that person who shows up and doesn't make an excuse not to be somewhere, or you know what I mean. it's
Absolutely.
it's showing up and getting out and being your best every day. And it's
Yeah.
not to say you don't have a few days now and then that you're just over it,
Well, of
right?
course.
But
Yeah, of course. I mean, you're
yeah,
right, because I always talk about removing the dark energy from my
yeah,
life, surrounding myself
mhm,
with the kind of people that bring out the best in me, and the
absolutely,
kind of people that I want to share energy with.
yeah,
And we can lift each other up through that, which is so wonderful. And I always say, I just want to live well. I want to live
that's
high.
right,
I want to
right.
live in a way that others say, "Huh, what's
I
going
want
on over
some of
there?
that.
I want
Yes.
some of that."
I
Right?
I
I
think
want
it's
some of that.
easy. I think it's easy sometimes for people to get into a kind of a mindset of, "Well, she's just a little too chipper," or that kind of thing. And it's just their own negativity and negative energy that's, dictating their life for them.
I
And,
think you're right.
that's something that the more you practice it, the easier it is. And you'll wake up one day and realize how incredibly happy you are. And then
Mhm.
the greatest part about it is you start attracting light, and that's kind of the laws of the universe, right? Light attracts light, dark attracts dark. And I realized how throughout my life, to tie this all in together, is how the darkness of where I was living and that and the mindset and everything of how it just brought on more problems and more problems and more problems. And once I shifted that, and once I really started focusing on my own energy and my own inner light and all those things, I started attracting it. And the opportunities opened up, and the friendships, and being here on this podcast, and, doing all the Ellen piece. And I did a piece for T-Mobile, and it's just all these opportunities just started pouring in. And I've been so incredibly thankful for that. And relationships and my boyfriend and all these
Mm-hmm.
things are just such incredible positive things that we wake up every day so thankful, for the day, for the opportunity, and we're just going to run with
You're
it.
right. No, you're right. And I find the same thing. It's been extraordinary to me over the last, I would say 4 or 5 years, how much my own experience has changed, um, in that breaking those cycles, understanding the power that I have
Yes.
as a human being,
Yeah.
and being able to not only visualize but direct my life in a way
Mhm.
that I'm writing this story, no one else. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
suddenly, like you're saying, and I couldn't agree more, when all of that light starts to occur, all the things that just naturally start coming to you,
They do.
you're not even chasing those dreams anymore,
No, you
because
have it
everything
out
is,
there.
it's just happening. It's
Yeah.
just happening. And, I feel so fortunate as an amputee myself that I get to engage people that I admire
Mhm.
and that I can share energy with, and that
Yeah.
I can take something away from this. And, I've talked to a few people, and, you know, uh, able-bodied people, non-amputees, whatever you want to call them, two-legged freaks. I talk to people, and they'll say, "Well, what's the thing, you love most about it?" And I say, "You'd find this hard to believe, but the whole experience is so incredibly self-serving.
Mhm.
Um, I actually feel like I do it for me.
Yeah.
I do it because I love it, and it's been just an awesome experience to
Mhm.
meet people like yourself, to be able to one day see something you've posted online, tap into that energy and go, wow, it'd be really cool if I was able to talk to Christi sometime. And then, and then to think, literally in a blink of an eye, you're here.
I'm
And now
here.
we're talking.
Yeah, it's and
And
and those kind of opportunities, they just open up in so many different ways when you open your heart and you allow all of it to happen. And that's where I felt like that's the key, is to open your heart to all the possibilities, and not limit yourself with I can't do this. I can't do this. We can look in ourselves and around us and go, what can I do? And let's just
right,
start moving in that direction. And once you start that motion, then everything else kind of comes along with it. And opening your heart, getting up every morning, being grateful, you know, just maintaining that positivity. Does that mean every day I feel great? No. There's days where, I had a little surgery and I had, these little things that have happened, but you just go, okay, that was
yeah.
something that happened. It doesn't define me. It's not going to change my course. Right. And I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to wrap up the interview. When you look at the balance sheet of your life, and there's so much positive, when
Yes.
something, happens to show up that's even remotely negative, you're kind of like, whatever. We have so much going right now that I'm not really even thinking about that. It's not all consuming, because there's so much positive energy that's propelling me forward.
Right.
Where would you say is the best place to follow you? And what's the website address for Talk of the Table?
It's tablegrilling.com. And
Tablegrilling.com.
hang on. Let me try that again. Sorry, guys. So the web address is tablegrilling.com, and that'll take you to talkofthetablecompany.com. We will
Got it.
be starting with brand new everything after probably mid-October. We're getting the studio all ready now and going to start filming. We're leaving for Europe next week. So hopefully getting a little bit of footage in while we're over in Europe. And
Awesome.
Dan, the magic editor, we'll get it all in. And one thing I just wanted to tap back into was talking about the journey and everything that we've all gone through. I think one of the single most important things that I found was understanding how everything I've gone through in my past is related to what happens in my future, and being grateful for it, and not looking back with regret or sadness or any of that, wishing it away. Because when we wish any of that away, we wish away the people, then the things that we love the most. And so we have to grasp onto that and just take it with us.
That is so wise and so beneficial, and that is something I will take with me today and remember. You know, Christi Hoehn, it is a pleasure to meet you. I am so happy that you were able to take the time.
Thank you, Rick.
And I will be following, of course, and look forward to all of these new and exciting endeavors
Thank
that
you.
you are embarking on. And of course, I wish you all the best. Thanks again. That's going to wrap it up for us. My name is Rick Bontkowski. This is the Amp'd UP211 podcast. And I just want to wish everyone health and happiness, and we will see you next time.